This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and its financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, developing world stocks started the week on a softer footing as a sharp rise in the coronavirus death toll kept a lid on buying. Traders say considerable uncertainty still persists across markets. MSCI's index for emerging market equities fell 0.4%, coming from a 2.7% weekly gain. South Africa's JSE remains subdued on those virus concerns. However, platinum miners were up about 2.27% today, while of course the gold mining index lost 1.45%. In Nigeria, the NSE all-share index slipped 1% on the day. Nestle was a huge drag on the bourse, falling 10%. Also, large cap stock MTN contributed to today's slide, falling almost 2% on the day. Now, also coming up on the show, U.S. President Donald Trump proposes to cut 21% of foreign aid budget. South Africa's chief negotiator for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, Wamkele Mene, named boss of the Secretariat. And China continues efforts to contain the coronavirus. Well, let us start off tonight's show in the U.S., where the White House is proposing a $4.8 trillion budget for the 2021 financial year. According to sources, President Donald Trump is seeking to cut foreign aid by 21% and reduce social safety net programs. He plans to spend the money to fund infrastructure projects and defense. The budget also seeks to raise funds by targeting $2 trillion in savings from mandatory spending programs in the world's biggest economy. President Trump's latest blueprint is seen as unlikely to be passed by, of course, the Democratic-controlled House of Reps. That's particularly in an election year. Well, that budget is causing some concern in African countries, but let's find out more from CGTN's Giles Gibson in Washington. Giles, good to have you on the show. Now, of course, Trump's planned a 21% cut to foreign aid has African countries worried. Is it clear yet which programs will be targeted and, of course, just how much the continent could lose from this move?
Well, the budget has just been released in the last 30 minutes or so, and we have had confirmation of these cuts of 21% to foreign aid. But what we haven't had is any sort of a breakdown about how that's going to affect, individual programs in individual countries. What we've also had confirmation of is that the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, that's essentially America's development bank, we've had confirmation that that's going to get a huge increase in its funding. That's going to go up to around $800 million. That's compared to $150 million for the previous year. So a pretty significant rise for that. The reason why that's not so sort of politically controversial as foreign aid is because it's supposed to be self-sustaining as a body. So it's supposed to not have any sort of a net cost to the American taxpayer.
Well, Giles, a similar budget proposal last year did face some resistance from Congress and it ultimately failed. What are the chances that Trump can get this through the House of Representatives that, of course, is Democratic controlled?
Well, there are every single year that President Trump has put out a budget since he became president in 2017, he's proposed cutting foreign aid by a significant margin. And every single year he's faced opposition both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. You mentioned there, of course, that the House of Representatives is controlled by the Democrats, so they are incredibly unlikely to give him any help at all, of course, with just the US election just coming around the corner. But I also think there's very little support in the US Senate for any cuts to foreign aid. I mean, in previous years when he has proposed this, when President Trump has tried to move forward with these cuts, he's faced opposition from people who are normally real close allies of him, people who are normally incredibly close to him. That's people like Senator Lindsey Graham, for example. So I think highly unlikely that this proposal will make any sort of progress through either chamber in the US Congress.
Now, of course, overall, he proposed a budget of $4.8 trillion. What has been the response to the bulk of this budget so far?
Well, the title of this budget that the Trump administration has given it is a budget for America's future, but it's already getting a lot of criticism and a lot of people saying that this is not what they want, particularly when it comes to this question of foreign aid. Mike Mullen, he used to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the most senior general, if you like, in the US military. He sent a letter to congressional leaders ahead of the release of this budget saying that this is a moment when more investment in diplomacy and development is needed, not less. And the argument that he's making there really is that if you spend money now on foreign aid programs, you're actually going to probably be spending less than if you don't, and you have to spend money in the future on the US military, on the State Department to try and respond to crises that could result as a result of those cuts.
Well, as always, many thanks for that update, Giles. That's Giles Gibson joining us there in Washington. Well, let's shift focus now. South African Wamkele Mene has been named the new Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. Mene is a former head of mission to the World Trade Organization for South Africa. He was one of 3 persons shortlisted for the job ahead of the African Union's 33rd Ordinary Session of the Assembly of Heads of State, which took place in Addis Ababa. Now, the AFCFTA Secretariat in Accra will be officially inaugurated in May 2020. That's ahead of July 1st, when trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area officially kicks off. Well, Coletta Wanjohi has been following these developments and now joins us from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Coletta, always good to have you on the show. Now, there were basically 6 finalists of the 120 candidates that qualified. Why was it that the South African candidate was picked?
Well, if you look at the situation, they are looking at competency, and the African Union has been quick to note that everybody who filed for the post was really qualified, because people came from different countries, and the countries fronted whom they believed or whom they saw as the best candidates, who had experience in trade and negotiation, people who had really taken their countries far in terms of trade and negotiations. But it came down to 3. We had South Africa, we had Nigeria, and we had the Democratic Republic of Congo. If you look at the candidates, their professions or their experience really speaks for them, and their experience really respectable. For example, if you look at the South African candidate who has just taken over, he was the chief negotiator for South Africa in the African Continental Free Trade Area, and also has experience with the World Trade Organization. The DRC candidate also has experience with the World Trade Organization, as well as leading the national efforts in disarmament in the DRC. While the candidate from Nigeria has great experience in financial economics, as well as the African Development Bank. So everybody was qualified, if you look at that, but they looked at competency. Then it went to the vote, and that's where we saw South Africa lobbying, as early as today morning, lobbying to have countries support it during a vote. And we are told, it was a closed session, but we are told that President Cyril Ramaphosa called for the vote because it became a bit controversial. When the foreign affairs ministers met here on 7th, they failed to agree on the candidate. It was pushed to the heads of state. So it was basically, everyone was good, then it went to the vote, and the winner got 2/3 of the majority.
Well, Coletta, speaking of that controversy, of course, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is the current chair of the African Union. Are other members satisfied with the selection of another South African to head the Accra-based Africa Continental Free Trade Area?
Well, if you look at it, the South African candidate got 2/3 of the majority of the heads of state. That means the countries in Africa. But there's also the other third that probably is divided between Nigeria and the DRC candidates who did not make it to that post of executive secretary for the SCFTA. So, of course, there are people who are not really happy. Maybe the trade-offs didn't work for some of them. Maybe they're not really happy. But also some of the arguments being forwarded because Nigeria has really been seen as a big, has really been seen as a big cause of disappointment for it. We've seen, like, for example, Nigeria has not even ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area, but South Africa ratified in 2019 and still deposited the instruments of the ACFTA. So the fact that a country has not ratified and really, just signed the other day, recently, then that really was kind of a disqualification for them. Then on the other side, West Africa really has some of the biggest continental institutions. We've got a Nigerian in the African Development Bank, in Chad on the broader Western African region. We have the African Union chairperson. Ghana has now got the Secretariat headquarters. So maybe some people who voted for this other candidate felt that a bit of the African Continental Free Trade Area needed to be shared on the other sides of the continent. Well, as it stands now, we will go with South Africa, and people are really praying and hoping that the new executive secretary will really lead the continent, especially from July when the implementation of the intra-Africa trade will be realized.
Well, many thanks, Coletta, for that update. That's Coletta Wanjoy joining us there in Addis Ababa. Now, medical experts in Africa have acknowledged China's efforts to contain the spread of the coronavirus. They say the regular information coming out of China is helping especially vulnerable countries in Africa to be prepared. Now, experts have been meeting on the sidelines of the African Union Summit for a discussion under the theme How to Achieve Epidemic Preparedness in Vaccine Manufacturing Capacity. Coletta again joins us reporting from Addis Ababa.
The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says there are no positive cases of coronavirus reported in Africa yet, but it says continued vigilance is required. 15 countries have been trained on how to diagnose and test for the symptoms of the virus, and now the continent has more than the 3 testing points that it previously had. 8 countries with direct flights to China have suspended flights there, but these medical experts say this is not the solution.
Yesterday, we received 3,000 test kits from China. And if we suspend our flights to China, we cannot get that kind of technical support from China. I think that is exactly what we are saying. WHO is saying that if we disrupt air travel and trade, then the part of the world that has not yet been affected will suffer in terms of response.
The Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation says a vaccine for coronavirus will take time.
CEPI and our partners and other partners around the world are rapidly investigating new therapeutics, rapidly working on the development of vaccines, but those vaccines will not become broadly available in the near term. Our best hope, and this assumes that things go smoothly, is that we may be able to make vaccines more broadly available starting in about a year.
These medical experts say African countries need to give regular information to their citizens on how to observe high level of basic hygiene at all times. That will give the continent the best chance of dealing with coronavirus if it arrives in Africa. Coletta Wanjohi for CGTN in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
And now to some corporate headlines today. Mining and commodities trader Glencore has signed a 5-year deal to supply battery maker Samsung SDI with up to 21,000 tons of cobalt. Now, the agreement will see the Swiss firm send up to 45% of its 2019 cobalt production to the South Korean company. The supply going to Samsung SDI will come mainly from Glencore's Katanga mine in the DRC. And cash-strapped South African power utility Eskom's urgent bid for larger electricity tariff increases has been rejected by a Pretoria High Court. Eskom's application was seeking electricity tariff hikes of 16.6% and 16.7% over the next 2 years to compensate for what it said was an error by energy regulator NERSA. Eskom argues that NERSA miscalculated its tariffs for the financial years beginning in 2019 to 2021. And Vestas Wind Systems is shopping for a new buyer for its 12.5% stake in Africa's largest wind farm. The move comes after Google dropped plans to purchase the wind farm following project delays. The Danish turbine manufacturer attributes Google's decision to pull out on delays relating primarily to the transmission line for the $679 million Lake Turkana wind power project, which is in Kenya. And staying with the U.S. tech giant Google, the firm's fight against a $2.64 billion EU antitrust fine will be played out this week at Europe's second highest court. That's according to parties involved in the case. The Luxembourg-based General Court will hear arguments from the Alphabet unit and a tech lobbying group which is backing its appeal. The European Commission, on the other hand, will be supported by Germany and 8 other companies. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a quick break now, still to come on the show. West African countries to investigate the impact of Nigeria's border closure on their economies. And South African Airways rescue plan faces opposition from government and the unions.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Now, West African nations have agreed to conduct an investigation into the impact of Nigeria's decision to close off its land borders to trade last year. Nigeria has banned the import and export of all goods through its land borders since August as part of what it describes as a campaign to tackle smuggling. Its smaller neighbors, many of whom rely on trade with Africa's biggest economy, have complained that this has caused severe hardship. Heads of state from the Economic Community of West African States have agreed to set up a committee in order to study and make a full report on Nigeria's land border closures with her neighbors. Now, the move to shut the borders followed a decision in July to sign Nigeria up to the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a project that creates a $3.4 trillion economic bloc. And to South Africa now, its airline, South African Airways business rescue practitioners have defended their decision to cancel domestic routes apart from the one between Johannesburg and Cape Town. Now, the rescue team says that the move is in the best interests of the troubled carrier. They also say that their actions are aimed at improving SAA's balance sheet and creating a platform for a strong and sustainable airline. The airline's rescue practitioners announced last week that it will cancel a raft of domestic air travel routes, eliciting a strong rejection from organized labor. President Cyril Ramaphosa also disagreed with the decision, with SA Express also ordered by the South Gauteng High Court in Johannesburg to undergo business rescue processes. The prospects for the national carrier still appear quite grim. Well, let's get the latest from CGTN's Angelo Coppola. He joins us now in Johannesburg. Angelo, always good to have you on the show. Now, it certainly appears that SAA's business rescue process is now in crisis. As we said, the unions are considering taking legal action to even have the practitioners removed. Even President Ramaphosa raising some objections there. What are the specific issues with their plan? And of course, how significant are these objections to the airline's business rescue plan?
Well, look, Ramaphosa made his comments excuse me, while he was on his way to accept that AU chairship on Friday in Addis Ababa. We had an inkling that he wasn't happy beforehand, and we also understand that the Public Enterprises Minister, Pravin Gordhan, also was unhappy. In fact, both of those parties issued statements within 5 minutes of each other. They both said that they were going to be engaging, as they put it, with those business rescue practitioners, and it is about cutting those flights out. It's about possible retrenchments, which is what the union's concerned about. So the President and Gordhan are unhappy about the route cancellations, which do kick in at the end of February. They're affecting some 100 flights, both locally within South Africa, regionally and internationally. The question, of course, on everyone's mind is whether the shareholder, in this case the government, can interfere in what the business rescue practitioners are actually doing. It's a grey area because of the fact that it's a voluntary exercise and not directly court sanctioned. We will have to wait, of course, another 3 weeks or so to see what the rescue plan looks like and whether they have had their minds changed for them by either the President or Pravin Gordhan. So it's not very complicated. It's about those flight cuts, and it's also about retrenchments in the thousands, we understand.
Well, the reality is, Angelo, not too long ago we were talking about how South African airlines only had enough money to keep running until the end of the month. So what is the reality of the airline's financial situation, even after that recent cash injection that we saw?
Well, look, we had a look at those numbers. In fact, the government has, who is it now? The Development Board of Southern Africa has given some $2 million or $140 million to our friends at SAA. They haven't got all of it. There's still another 100-odd million that's going to come. So that means they'll probably carry on doing business until the end of the second week in March, if they go according to the way things are running right now. And of course, there's been no talk of more money coming from the fiscus, and certainly the local banks don't seem that interested still, bearing in mind that a couple of weeks ago, they didn't think much about the government attempts to raise that 140-odd million that they were looking for then. So government does have another option though, and it can go to the joint houses of parliament to ask for a special appropriation, because parliament is of course going into session straight after the SONA, which is the State of the Nation address that happens this week. So it's unclear though what will happen or where the new injection is going to come from, because there's going to need to be one, and it's unlikely to come from the PIC or the Government Employee Pension Fund, because they are apparently being targeted by government and some of the unions as a possible suitor for Eskom and its huge mountain of debt that they have at the moment. So things aren't looking good, but government does apparently have a backdoor in via Parliament for that special appropriation if they need more money. Uche.
Well, speaking of government, Angelo, Mining Minister Gwede Mantashe, he's now added his voice to a growing number of officials, including Finance Minister Tito Mboweni, who believe that SAA should be sold off. Given its debt position, is that even a possibility?
I chuckle because the situation is so fraught at the moment, and the fact that Mantashe has stepped in at this late stage, just a week or 4 days before President Ramaphosa is meant to be giving his speech at SONA, and we're expecting, at least one analyst is expecting that Ramaphosa is going to be actually speaking in depth about the situation at SAA and what's going to be happening there. It's interesting that he stepped in now and made those comments. Whether or not he's going to be swayed or change his mind at SONA remains to be seen, but he can't be seen to be backing down right now. And of course, all the power rests within cabinet, and it seems to be split at the moment, and that might be why Mantashe has stepped out into the open on Sunday and put his money behind the Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni, who also wants to close down SAA, and he has made many scathing remarks about that fact. So Thursday is going to be quite an important day for the president in terms of what he's going to do, and we'll see where the balance of power is shifted within cabinet.
Well, we'll certainly be watching. Many thanks, as always, Angelo, for your insights. Angelo Coppola joining us there in Johannesburg. Well, staying in South Africa, the country has signed a new agreement that will help tackle plastic pollution as well as create new jobs. The South Africa Plastic Pact is part of a global network of stakeholders in the plastic packaging value chain. CGTN's Travis Andrews has the details.
The South African Plastics Pact.
It's been described as a potential game changer. Many believe the South African Plastics Pact could bring about real change in the country's fight to rid itself of plastic pollution. That's why it's got the buy-in from some of the country's biggest plastic producers, who've all committed to 4 ambitious targets to prevent plastics from becoming pollution by 2025.
This is the first time that these different organisations come together in South Africa to commit to address plastic waste and pollution. And this is the first African country to join our global initiative, the Plastics Pact Network. And in doing so, South Africa is stepping forward as a leader to address this problem.
South Africa joins other countries who've signed up to the pact, including the Netherlands, France and the UK, who are exchanging knowledge and best practices in forming a plastics circular economy. The Pact's members have all vowed to work towards their 2025 target to make plastic designs that are either recyclable or compostable.
We've got 22 major big businesses signed up today from the Plastics Pact, from all sectors, which is fantastic, from grocery, from fashion, from homewares. And this is why it's bigger than just one company's initiative or even one sector's initiative. So there's no other initiative that brings together all the sectors with the suppliers and the recyclers, which is what makes this really powerful.
The government has also signed up to the Plastics Pact through the Department of Environmental Affairs, who've joined due to concerns about the impact plastic pollution is having on the country's natural resources. According to research, over 8 million tons of plastic leak into the ocean every single year. But here in the Western Cape, that situation has been exacerbated by the drought. And plastic water bottles such as this are finding their way into the sea.
Our current plastic system is not designed to keep plastic in use. So what I mean is that millions of tons of plastic around the world are going to landfill, being incinerated or ending up in the ocean. And our research shows that if we continue on like this, by 2050 there could be more plastics than fish in the ocean.
But there is at least a commitment by members to assist in alleviating that situation, and will all be involved in every stage of the plastic value chain to make sure that their plastic products end up in the economy and not in the environment. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
And in Somalia, a new petroleum law has successfully been established for the first time in decades. The law sets out rules and regulations regarding investment and sharing of resources between the capital Mogadishu and other federal member states. With more on this, here's CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello.
Somalia has signed into law a new petroleum legislation after it received an endorsement from both houses of parliament, ending years of deadlock among the country's politicians. The landmark legislation is now expected to set the stage for oil and gas exploration in the Horn of African nation for the first time in history.
Today we are happy to announce that Somalia has put in place petroleum laws that will govern oil exploration. The law will help govern agreements between the government and international corporations, and the public will now be able to witness the extraction of natural resources in the country for the first time since we began doing service in the early 1950s.
Seismic data by oil corporations have revealed significant oil and gas reserves in several parts of the country, a move analysts argue could help transform the country's economy.
The law talks about the life cycle of petroleum, from exploration to discovery to appraisal to development and to production.
The law also highlights how revenue will be shared between the national government and regional administrations. Somalia now hopes that the new law will attract big oil corporations. big oil corporations are slowly beginning to make a comeback as the country's business environment continues to record drastic changes. Notable ones include Shell and ExxonMobil that have recently expressed interest in the exploration of oil and gas after they were forced to end all activities in the country during the civil war. With the new law in place, Somalia hopes to conduct several roadshows, mainly in Europe and the United States, in a bid to attract big multinational companies.
The number of blocks, actually, onshore, there are too many, and offshore is twice the number of onshore wells, or onshore blocks that we can get. The government will open an acreage, like we opened 15 blocks quite recently, and work will be focused on that. Once we finish that, then we will move to another, we will open another area, maybe that will consist of 10 or another 15 blocks onshore, offshore, and work will happen on that.
Meanwhile, the public has welcomed the latest signing, a move they hope will bring stability and job creation to young people who have been forced to endure decades of conflict. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now. Still to come on the show. We look at China's continuing efforts to contain the coronavirus. And a spacecraft built to study the sun in entirely new ways sets off.
No one again, he can holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
And just about 5:30, let's recap today's top headlines. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir has received a 5-day deadline from the East African nation bloc to decide on state boundaries in the country. Kiir and rebel leader Riek Machar also have until February 22nd to form a power-sharing government. The establishment of the Transitional Authority was delayed twice last year. Kiir and Machar met on Sunday in Ethiopia on the sidelines of the African Union Summit. And suspected Boko Haram insurgents have killed at least 30 people in Nigeria. The attackers also abducted people, including women and children. The Sunday attack on passengers occurred in Auno, which is a town 20 kilometers from Maiduguri, the capital of Borno State. The state governor says insurgents set fire to 18 vehicles during that raid. And the total number of confirmed cases of coronavirus in China has surpassed 40,000. The death toll stands at about 909, with more than 3,500 people making a full recovery. More than half of the confirmed cases and most of the deaths are in China's Hubei province, where the epidemic began. Newly confirmed cases outside Hubei have dropped for 6 consecutive days by nearly 50%. The virus has spread to 24 other countries, with a total of 388 confirmed cases outside China. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, Monday was the first day to resume work after the Spring Festival in most places across China. Guangdong, a southern province, is renowned for manufacturing, and it's a major destination for millions of migrant workers. Can production lines resume as planned, especially for small and medium enterprises? Well, CGTN reporter He Weiwei has more from a tiny factory in Guangzhou, the capital city of the province.
I am at a factory producing packaging machines in Guangzhou, and as you can see, the production resumed partially since Monday. And before they started the production, precautionary measures have been taken. The workers used disinfectants to clean the floor thoroughly, and the factory provides them with masks and gloves. And all these measures are compulsory for factories to resume their work in Guangdong province. And just now I talked to the manager of the factory about the difficulties that they're facing. And the manager mentioned 3 aspects. The first is the business. 20% of their products, the delivery dates may be postponed due to a production delay. And the second is the cash flow. And the manager says if the epidemic is to continue to 3 or 4 months, he believes every company will suffer a lot. And if that's the reality, he will have to ask for more loans from the banks. And the third is labor. And as you can see, this is a very small factory. It has only a dozen of workers. So his company doesn't face a shortage of labor. But actually, that is the most urgent problem facing a lot of factories in Guangdong province. And to solve this problem, a provincial human resource management association has initiated a plan called Labor Sharing Plan to provide labor dispatch services. That means they will help the workers who are ready to work but finds their factories still closed to work at other factories who are now facing the shortage of labor. And besides that, other measures have also been taken to help the companies, like to cut down the rental or to keeping a relatively low interest rates of loans. And these measures are not just taken in Guangzhou, but in multiple cities across China, hoping to help the companies, especially the small and medium ones, to go through the difficult time at the moment. He Weiwei, CGTN, Guangzhou.
Now, of course, the coronavirus epidemic has changed the way people live and work. Companies around China have initiated working from home now. With the help of online working apps, employees say they don't feel inconvenienced much. CGTN's Ma Ke explains.
It's day 1 back on the job for Miss Zhang, who works as a sports events planner. Unlike regular times, she's greeting her colleagues via a screen.
Because our work building is closed and some of my colleagues are under precautionary house quarantine, we now work through the internet. We mainly use conference calls and online assignment platforms. It takes time to get used to, but I think by staying at home, we're being responsible to ourselves and others.
Unlike Miss Zhang, Zhang is used to home office hours. He works for an oil company, dealing mainly with foreign customers.
Our business partners and colleagues abroad understand our situations and understand our working schedules at home. But we do have some inconvenience contacting each other. For example, we cannot deliver our documents to overseas branches in time.
To deal with the challenges, working app developers have added new functions like super group chat, conference streaming, and online health reporting to boost up home office efficiency while checking the employees' health conditions. Work WeChat developer Tencent says server requests have grown by tenfold Monday morning.
We have roughly 2.5 million active corporate users.
That's 3 times compared to this time a year ago. To meet the surging demands, my coders finished 2 months' worth of programming just last week.
According to internet giant Alibaba, over 200 million people in China are now on home office mode. CGTN, Beijing.
Meanwhile, several African leaders, as well as the president of the African Development Bank, Akiwumi Adesina, and the director of economic affairs in the African Union Commission, Jean-Denis Gabikini, have commended China's efforts to prevent and control the coronavirus epidemic. The leaders say the measure taken by China to lock down some of its cities, particularly that of Wuhan, is tremendous and portrays China's responsibility to its people and the rest of the world.
Well, I don't think anything wrong with it because this was done when we had Ebola in West and Central Africa. You know, they locked down particular towns. People couldn't move. You know, I mean, you take the case of agriculture. When you have the foot and mouth disease, you cordon off particular areas where those things are. Whether it is also avian influenza, a problem with that, they have to cordon off areas where that is. So whenever you have a contagion effect, it's a normal thing that you do. You know, you restrict movement, and so it's not anything unusual. This is always done when you have epidemiology of diseases. Well, I think that any time that you have an incidence of exogenous shocks from health, it is not just an issue for a country. It's an issue for the global commons. And so we are all in it together. That can happen in any part of the world, and we will be in the same thing. I think the Chinese are doing a fantastic job of trying to contain it the best they can. Obviously, you know, with the WHO providing the support that is needed, everybody's working around the clock around the world to find the vaccines for us to deal with this. You know, my heart goes out to all the people that have been affected and that have died from this. You know, a single death from any disease, from any infection, is one death too many. And so we are all in it together. It's not a question of any country and so on. We live in a global commons, and anything that affects any country can easily have impact everybody else. So we must have a collective global solution on it and continue to encourage the Chinese government in all they're doing.
You must remember that the coronavirus can spread very quickly, and the Chinese population is very dense and huge. So I think for the Chinese to do that was a wise thing. We also applaud them for the sterling work they're doing. It's remarkable. I mean, the hospital they've built and all the efforts they've put into controlling this virus, because they are not only doing it for the Chinese, but for the world, because the world is a global village. An outbreak in one country can quickly spread to the rest of the world, but they've done a wonderful job to contain it.
Well, the Chinese know the situation better than anyone else. It's local with them, so we agree with whatever measure is they're doing. We trusted the wisdom of the Chinese government and the Chinese people. We know Chinese government, Chinese people are doing not only for China but for the whole world to contain the coronavirus.
We think that just to make sure not to affect others, it's a good move to lock the city so that within that city they will be able to control the situation and then to prevent other cities and other environment to get contaminated. So for us, economically speaking, it's a good move. The general effort that China is doing for us is really amazing. They are doing well because we also learned that they built an hospital in 9 days, and that's really something that must be encouraged and make sure that they are doing well, and they need support. We must make sure to come together and to make sure that Chinese, they can control and stop that virus.
I have read actually the World Health Organization reports, international reports, and they are all actually appreciating what China is doing. Of course, we cannot say that, thankfully, that epidemic has happened in China, but in a way, maybe if it happened in a country without this such great experience, maybe it could have been very dangerous to the whole world. And I think China is doing very well with that, and they have the experience of working in such environment, and they have the facilities even, which many countries of the world they don't have. And I think the way also they handle the Wuhan areas was very good, and they maintain the health situation in a good way. At the same time, they have facilitated for the countries who want to bring their students or citizens who live in Wuhan area in a very also respectful way, because they have helped a lot, and we hope that in a very short time they will overcome this problem.
Now, through the China General Chamber of Commerce for East Africa, Chinese firms in Kenya have donated money, face masks and protective clothing to China. The aim is to assist health workers fighting to contain the outbreak of the coronavirus in the world's second biggest economy. The chairman of the China Chamber of Commerce in East Africa, Han Jun, says more assistance in cash and protective clothing is expected. This is as the Chinese companies continue to donate money and equipment.
Chinese nationals overseas are very concerned about the outbreak of novel coronavirus in China. In Kenya, many Chinese firms have come together to help. We're actively donating to our towns and cities back home. In the past few days, dozens of companies have donated money and masks and protective clothing and other essentials. Moreover, Chinese Chamber of Commerce presidents are leading similar activities to support those efforts through financial contributions and donation of equipment.
And across the globe, governments and healthcare workers are stepping up the fight against the coronavirus. CGTN's Mark New explores how global businesses are coping with the epidemic.
Even the world's most valuable public company, Apple, is not immune from the effects of the coronavirus. Apple suppliers in China have had to shut down facilities, forcing CEO Tim Cook to push back the timeline for reopening factories outside of Wuhan, China, from the end of January to February 10th.
We know that some larger companies that have presence there have actually temporarily closed some of those locations in specific cities. We know that that supply chains are being disrupted right now. So it is a big challenge.
Laurel Munoz's Silicon Valley Leadership Group represents 350 companies in Silicon Valley, including such tech giants as Apple, Google, and Microsoft. Another member, Facebook, was the first major U.S. company to tell its employees to avoid travel to China. It's not alone.
Things like restricting travel for American or Western employees to China itself and or the surrounding region around China. Members who have employees who are just recently returning from China have oftentimes been asked to work at home for a period of 14 days to allow that expiration of the incubation period for the virus.
The auto industry is being hit hard. A Tesla VP said on microblogging site Weibo that its Model 3 deliveries in China will be delayed. The world's largest auto supplier, Bosch, has temporarily closed 2 plants in Wuhan.
If you're waiting for your daily shipment of parts and the plant that's producing them is shut down, you may have to shut down the entire assembly line.
I think it does expose and reveal the need for greater planning to have those contingency plans going forward, whether that's finding alternative sources for employees or alternative supply chains as well.
Laurel Munoz points out that much of the innovation that happens in Silicon Valley is derived from work that takes place in other countries like China. So the more the situation drags on, the more innovation as a whole suffers. Mark New, CGTN, Sunnyvale, California.
Well, let's shift focus now. America's first and biggest auto show of the year is in high gear. Lots of visitors, lots of excitement about the new vehicles being unveiled in Chicago. But behind the exhibits, there's worry about the new coronavirus and its impact on manufacturing. CGTN's Dan Williams with more.
The Chicago Auto Show is North America's first big auto show of the year. That makes it a perfect venue for automakers to launch their new models. But away from the glitz, industry heads are watching with some concern developments surrounding the coronavirus. Beyond the threat to human health, the virus is having economic consequences. It's already seen auto manufacturers suspend operations at plants in China. And a long-term epidemic could spell even deeper trouble.
All we can do is hope and pray that hopefully they continue to move very, very quickly and to be able to take care of this virus, because I think it's not only going to affect the economy, but we also have a huge stake in the Olympics, and it's a big deal for us.
A new study from the Anderson Economic Group suggests the coronavirus will continue to have a significant impact on the auto industry. Not only has production been halted at plants in China, the virus has also disrupted the supply chain of auto parts. That has led to Hyundai suspending production in South Korea, while Jeep says one of its European plants is also at risk of suspending production for similar reasons.
These parts aren't stockpiled necessarily where they're built or at the final assembly location. It's all this remarkable synchronized ballet, and if any part of that process has to slow or stop, then the whole line has to stop. I mean, factories don't have lines that are just sitting unused. That's wasted money. So it's hard to imagine that there's a backup plan that would work.
The auto industry has faced a number of headwinds over the last few years, but new trade agreements, including the USMCA, the trade deal between the US, Mexico and Canada, appears to have brought some stability to the sector. As for the US market itself, industry executives say that remains strong. Although US auto sales dipped slightly last year, they still topped 17 million for a fifth straight year.
Everyone wants to talk about the market, but we're 17 million units. 17 million units is a very, very strong industry. So I'm not worried about the future.
That enthusiasm, however, is tempered by challenges facing automakers as they move towards electric and automated vehicles. The US market may appear to be strong, but perhaps in these times, not overconfident. Dan Williams, CGTN, Chicago.
And speaking of vehicles, a spacecraft built to study the sun in entirely new ways has set off for the center of the solar system. Now, over the weekend, the solar orbiter built by the European Space Agency in collaboration with NASA lifted off from Cape Canaveral in Florida. With a solar orbiter, scientists will for the first time get a good view of the top and bottom of the sun. Until now, almost all of the solar watching spacecraft have orbited in the ecliptic, or the same plane that the planets travel around the sun. The mission will also help scientists understand how the sun affects satellites orbiting around our planet. The mission is expected to complete 22 orbits of the sun in about 10 years. Well, on that note, let's take a look at how commodities perform today. Oil prices slipping, with Brent crude falling over 1% on weaker Chinese oil demand. And as traders, of course, wait to see if Russia will join other oil producers in seeking further output cuts. Oil, of course, has dropped more than 20% from a peak in January. That's after the spreading virus hit demand and fueled concerns of excess supplies. Meanwhile, gold prices steady today, with spot gold little change. They did see some slight pressure from positive economic data from China and the US. Well, let's take a short break now. Still to come. A Tanzanian entrepreneur with new ways of getting more from the tree of life.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, the baobab fruit can be found in certain regions of Africa, Arabia, Australia, and even Madagascar. Also known as the tree of life, the baobab has large fruit whose seeds are commonly consumed for their citrus-like flavor. Now, Sophia Silo, a Tanzanian entrepreneur, shares her process of transforming the seeds into an even tastier treat, exploiting the vast potential of the age-old tree to establish a strong business. CGTN's Isaac Lucando has her story.
Sophia Silo has a sweet tooth. Her love of candy prompted her to think of a new way of enjoying her favorite fruit. She uses baobab seed powder to produce tasty candy.
One day, I sat and thought to myself that it would be great to make seedless baobab candy, and that is what I now make.
Baobab candy is not a new concept. For a long time, those making it would simply coat baobab seeds with a layer of sugar and coloring. In her process, Sophia adds food coloring, sugar and vanilla essence to baobab powder to create candy. What started as a means for her to enjoy her favorite treat soon developed into a business.
I once shared the candy that I'd prepared with friends, and they loved it and advised me to start a business.
Innovative ideas are helping Tanzanian entrepreneurs like Sophia own businesses that not only provide them with incomes to run their lives, but also help the country's economy grow.
Sophia felt that her business would do better by packaging her candy. She also began deliveries to customers in her neighborhood. Demand for the product is now on the rise.
I really love baobab candy, and many Tanzanian ladies love it too, especially the ones that don't have seeds, because the candy that has seeds in it tends to irritate the teeth.
She makes deliveries on time, and her customer care is good. That is why she gets more customers, and baobab fruit gets a wider market.
Sophia says she plans to expand her business beyond the few neighborhoods that she currently serves. She hopes to earn more money and hopefully better her life, one tasty treat at a time. Isaac Lucando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Well, before we go, let's look at how Africa's currencies have performed today. South Africa's rand was weaker. It has broken through the psychologically important 15 rand per dollar level. However, analysts note that it is still finding a resistance level and had come off the low of 15.12 reached on Friday. Local focus is on Thursday's State of the Nation address as well as local economic releases. Meanwhile, Egypt's pound gaining today, achieving its strongest against the dollar in 3 years. The pound traded as strong as 15.66 to the dollar on Monday, compared with 15.69 on Sunday. Kenya's shilling weakening due to increased dollar demand from merchandise importers and, of course, some multinational companies. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.